My name is Tatum and I am functionally blind. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I have long brown hair and I'm against a white backdrop. And I have brown glasses, pink earrings with little circle balls on them, and then I have a t-shirt with yellow or orange and pink designs on it with little blue triangles and polka dots and stripes across it. And today I will be interviewing Judy Heumann, who is going to introduce herself right now.
Hey everybody, my name is Judy Heumann. I'm a 73-year-old white disabled woman. Washed my hair this morning and it's really flat. I'm wearing red glasses and silver earrings. My blouse is a button-down blouse with like a dark green and orange flowers and some gold. And we're in the foyer of our house. And so we have pictures and the dining room table behind me where people that we work together Monday through Friday. And that's Stevie in the background.
Nice. Awesome. So first of all, just thank you so much for being here today. We know that you and Ed were a huge influence to this movement, and we're super excited to get to know kind of your take on Ed's history, because that's a really important part of this movement.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we just really appreciate all of the work that you both have done. So I guess kind of my first kickoff question is just, how did you meet Ed? At what point? And like, what was your kind of first connection with him?
So I was living in Brooklyn, New York. I was a teacher after having sued the Board of Ed. I had been accepted into graduate school at Columbia in community organizing. And I get this call. I didn't know who Ed Roberts was. CIL in the East Coast was not a known entity at all. And he told me that he had gotten my name, that he was recruiting a few disabled activists to go to graduate school at Berkeley and to learn more about CIL and then to go back to their communities and start similar programs. So my first engagement with Ed was on the phone. And we talked obviously about what CIL was, what they were hoping it to be. I was chair of a group called Disabled in Action at that time. And it was an advocacy organization that was not doing any support services like CIL was. And I was intrigued by what was going on. So I applied to graduate school and was accepted into School of Public Health. So that's how I originally met Ed. Nice. And from that, first discussion, it was very clear that Ed was a visionary. Ed used his connections. He was a networker, and he looked for creative opportunities to advance work that was happening. I mean, I later learned that Ed had polio when he was 14. I did know that. That's one of the things he had told me. But he didn't tell me at that point that the transition for him from being a non-disabled 14-year-old to acquiring a disability, he was very athletic, then became a quadriplegic, as you know, using a ventilator. And so he really had to make a decision about whether or not he wanted to live. And so I think really once he made that decision that he did, it really launched him to be the person that he probably never would have been had he just been a run-of-the-mill non-disabled guy.
Yeah, I love that. That's, I don't know, such an important part of his story. And I just think that's really cool. And so kind of from there, after you got to know Ed and like we're on this side of things now, what influence did he have on your life, and how did kind of what role did he play, and how did he influence you particularly?
I mean, I think we influenced each other, which was one of the things that I liked about working with Ed. I mean, our when I came out to graduate school at Berkeley, I came out with a woman named Nancy D'Angelo, and the apartment that we got was in the same building, apartment building as CIL at that point. And so it was a real opportunity on a regular basis to go and learn what they were doing. And I got on the board, as I said. And my development really was as a disabled child. And so my experiences really began as a child. Ed's did not. You know, most of the people at CIL at that point, not all, had acquired their disabilities when they were older. And as you I assume, know, there really can be a disconnect between people who acquire their disabilities when they're younger and older. And so we had really great discussions on what we needed to do to really expand the work that we were doing. And I was in Berkeley for a year and a half in graduate school and on the board before I came to Washington. So, you know, we would hang out, go to his house, and it was, you know, really seeing how Ed operated. You know, he had a great sense of strength, and he exuded it all the time. He knew many people in Berkeley because it's very small, you know, compared to Brooklyn with 4 million people. And he had a great dog. And when we would, you know, kind of walk around the neighborhood, it was always a fun thing to do. And I mean, over the years, what I was really learning about Ed, as I've been saying, is his sparkle, his love of food, his love of engaging with people. He loved sports. You know, he was very able to speak with people about sports and politics. And he lived on the same block with the mayor of Berkeley. And, you know, so he was constantly engaging. And he was the real role model. I mean, I think throughout the course of his life, he became a more well-known role model who encouraged people that they could do it. And not that they were doing things individually, but when Ed got to Sacramento and became the director of the Department of Rehabilitation, he brought in a number of senior disabled people to serve in positions in the administration, which had never been done before. And he also very much was able to really jump in, much to the chagrin of counselors who weren't necessarily on the same page, really advancing the voices of disabled people and talking about how our lives and our vision for our lives shouldn't be limited. I think one of the powerful things about Ed is he enabled people, regardless of their age, to go beyond what they thought. And Ed knew this. I mean, Ed knew that, you know, when people first engaged with him, because he could really only move one finger, that he was completely disarming them. If they would engage with him and he would pull them in with his eyes and his smile, they would have great discussions. And, you know, when you would talk to parents of disabled children, they really saw their child in him as an adult. And I think that was really important and really very much spoke to and still speaks to the fact that there are too few adult role models for children and families. But then, of course, he was a role model for adults and seniors because he was so articulate, handsome guy, and really made things happen. And his support for the creation of 10 centers for independent living in California was amazing. And before there even had been national legislation creating 10 centers for independent living nationally. So California was way ahead in the area of independent living. And it really was because of Ed's efforts and successes.
That's amazing. Love that. And sort of as you, I think you talked about this a little bit, but I would love to hear more. I know we're from the Yo Disabled and Proud network, so the youth organized, so kind of from a youth perspective. So I think one of the things that as youth we're wondering is, what was Ed like as a young activist? Like, I know you said at age 14 was when he sort of made that choice to continue living. And so like, I'm wondering, even into his time at Berkeley and like the early years of his advocacy, what was that like?
So I didn't get to know Ed until 1972,
Okay.
73. And he went to Berkeley, I think, in 1963. So I didn't know him then, but you could tell historically that he, once he made that transition, that he was going to live and live with neon lights and underscore and, flashes going off. This creation of, his acceptance into the dorms at Berkeley. I mean, that was a big deal because he could have just as easily tried to get his education not living in the dorms. But the fact that he was really exerting his right to be able to be a student on campus, and then he and others setting up the rolling quads, those are all very important indicators of what he was going to be doing.
Love that. And I think as you were talking, just as a disabled college student, we still talk about as a college student who's living in the dorms, we still talk about the ways that he did that, and that impacted our ability to live in the dorm and our ability for housing on campus. And so that's lovely. And I think one of our questions that kind of ties into this is what could youth do today to forward Ed's movement, and even in some ways like your movement, like the movement that the two of you were so influential in? Because I know like as a college student, we've I don't know, I've told many people looking up to Ed that I would love to just get out there and like start curb cutting some things with my friends in the middle of the night like he did or whatever. Like I personally want to add on to this movement, and I know so many other people do. So
first of all, it isn't Ed and my movement, it's our movement. Yeah. And that's the first thing that needs to change. I think what you saw from Ed, myself, and hundreds of disabled people around the country was really a more public display of not accepting no. Mm-hmm. And it was also the fact that many of us recognized that doing things by ourselves was not going to advance the changes that we needed. And so that's why looking at the rolling quads and looking at the creation of the disabled students program at Berkeley, at the same time, that there had been other disabled student programs set up in the 50s. University of Illinois in Champaign had a pretty advanced program that had disabled students with significant disabilities. The difference, I think, between what was going on then, and of course I wasn't there, so I'm just being anecdotal about it, was Berkeley being Berkeley, it was also really a community that challenged authority. And certainly in the 60s, when Ed started going to school, it was in the middle of the free speech movement. So there were many things going on. But I think what is really, really important is that we learn from people before us and with us, and recognize that we can gain strength from what people have done. But at the end of the day, it's you as an individual and with your friends. And so I think that's really the most important thing, is that we're in a different period now, right? We're 50 years later, there are new challenges. And, for me, on college campuses, we need to be demanding that universities get beyond accessibility. That they were supposed to start that in a meaningful way in 73. And that the failure to have disability studies courses, minors, majors, and the failure to have disability integrated into American studies, Black studies, Latino studies, on and on, is doing a disservice, not just to us who have disabilities, but to all students on campus and off campus. So I think, looking at the ADA generation, I think is very important, gaining strength from what we have done in the past and continue to do. But, you're the leadership of today and tomorrow, working with, the leaders in the United States and around the world, and own your voice, be proud of your voice. And that's really what Ed would want to, people to be doing. It's really, and enjoy your food. I think that's really important. Ed would go to restaurants, any place that we were in the US or around the world. He was a big flirt. It was always great to be with him and watch him engage with that. But he was a fun-loving, serious, visionary guy who had respect of others and who respected him.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. And that's super helpful advice. I think one of the things that I have just taken from this movement is that we're not in this alone. Like, we're not dropped off and doing this whole self-advocacy thing. We're doing it as a collective of like people advocating for each other.
But I think there are too many people that are not a part of the movement. Okay. I think one important part of Ed was that he, in accepting himself for who he was, he also demanded that people look at him in a different way. And one of the messages from him was both to non-disabled people and to others with disabilities who acknowledged or not, is disability is a normal part of life. And, we need to work together, disabled and non-disabled people, with disabled people in the leadership positions, because we need to really be changing the world.
Yeah, that feels super huge. And that like inclusive piece of it is really fundamental to, I think, what my hope is and what a lot of us.
Ed worked with labor unions, he worked with the Gray Panthers, he worked with, many different groups. And that collegiality and collaboration was something and is something that we all need to be doing all the time.
Okay, yeah. And okay, I'm gonna ask one more question and then we can head out. But my last question, I guess, is when did you realize that Ed was such a game changer? And when did you realize that he was going to make this big of a difference? Like, was there a particular moment, or was it just kind of like in?
I mean, I knew that when I spoke to Ed that we were going to be making changes. I wouldn't have been interested in moving out to California. My family was in the East Coast. I was very active in the movement in the East Coast. And I was unexpectedly drawn into working with a new model, because the CIL model and the DSP model was different than what I had been working in. So, the phone call in and of itself made it very clear that Ed was an out-of-the-box guy.
Yeah.
And a movement, a new aspect of the movement was being born. because remember, in the East Coast, you know, I really have to say we knew nothing about California. We knew nothing about Ed Roberts. We knew nothing about CIL. The first time that the first time that I ever heard of CIL was when Disabled in Action and many other groups on the East Coast had organized demonstrations against President Nixon and the vetoing of the Rehabilitation Act. And those demonstrations were in Washington, and 2 people from CIL came. That was the first time I heard of CIL. First time that we heard of Ed Roberts at that point. So I think it was a great merger of East and West Coast activists who were really fighting for change. And Ed, as a charismatic leader, was always something that was very clear.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to get to.
We'll talk in July.
Yes, I'm excited for
Say
that.
hi to everybody.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you in July.